Warning, the following video is not intended for younger audiences. Strong language is used throughout and not exactly suited for children. Fuck you, YouTube, for making me resort to saying this. Let's talk viral games for a moment. Quite a few games will be blessed with the status of viral when they're played by the internet gods known as Let's Players. The list of these games is always expanding, including Minecraft, Fortnite, Doki Doki Literature Club, and the Five Nights at Freddy's series to name a small fraction of them. But among those is a little indie game known as Bendy and the Ink Machine. Created by the Meatly, Mike Mood and everyone else as part of Kindly Beast, also referred to as Joey Drew Studios Inc., Chapter 1 was released in February of 2017, and became an instant hit among gamers. Is that phrase worth it though? Well, let's see. In beautiful HD PS4 gameplay! Also, I'll be spoiling this game inside out, so if you don't want to see any spoilers, I suggest skipping this video. Come on. Okay, we done? Right, let's go. The game starts with a note addressed to our protagonist of the day, Henry Stein, from his old friend Joey Drew, asking him to return to his now dilapidated workshop, Joey Drew Studios. The in-game place, not the dev team this time, as there is something that he thinks Henry should see. Shortly after exploring the inside of the studio, Henry comes across a large room, and when the nearby switch is powered up and used, it reveals the titular ink machine in all of its inky splendour. It's a quick reveal, yes, but it kicks off this game perfectly. Not long afterwards, you find a corpse of one of the studio's characters, Boris the Wolf, strapped to a board like some sort of experiment, as a quick reminder that something is in fact off about the workshop. After gathering various ritual items, starting the ink flow and turning on the machine itself, we'll head back to the ink machine's room only to be greeted by... the jump scare. Courtesy of this contorted-looking version of Bendy, the titular character, Joey Drew Studios' most popular character, and this warped counterpart is the main antagonist of the game. The studio then starts to fill with ink, but Henry is unable to escape as the floor then collapses around him, leading him to come across a summoning circle that causes him to see 3 different images for some reason, then faints, ending Chapter 1. Chapter 2 carries on from there, and soon thereafter Henry learns that the ink demon isn't the only threat among him. There are all sorts of entities trying to capture and or kill our hero, such as the Searchers, the Lost Ones, and even former employees of the company such as Sammy Lawrence, who's a pretty entertaining character when it comes to his devotion to be free of the ink to the point of treating Bendy like some sort of god. There's also a demented version of Alice Angel, who may have originally been her first voice actress Susie Campbell, now obsessed with making herself look beautiful by stealing the hearts of other ink beings, mainly Boris's, hence the body in Chapter 1. I like that we're given their motivations not long after meeting them, so we can tell what purpose they're supposed to serve in the story. But Ink Bendy, however, doesn't have any personality or reason to be hostile, apart from being securely contained in the outside world, and personally I'm fine with that, since this was an indie title, but I would have liked to see if it was expanded on in the next game. But his ink effects are amazing though. I mean, just look at those ink effects slipping and sliding all over him. In fact, the whole game looks amazing. From what you've seen, the game goes for a visual style reminiscent of cartoons from the 1930s, which gives the game a more unique appearance compared to most other games in the horror genre. Every little detail from the archways to the furniture has multiple sketch lines to give the environments that nice looking hand-drawn charm. Even the parts that aren't hand-drawn, such as the ink, have really nice reflection and texture work to help the puddles look as shiny, but also as cartoony enough to fit the game's style, and especially on enemies like Bendy, with this added ink dripping effects. From my experience, the lighting can be a bit funky at times, but not all the time. For the most part, it's pretty good since it's been smoothed out a little bit after an update, and it rarely looks dodgy. The worst offender though would be the tunnel segment in Chapter 5, where instead of the light following the player, the lights actually split into several pieces. It just doesn't feel natural moving from one part of the tunnel to the next. You might also encounter a misaligned wall texture here and there, but like the lighting mishaps, they're so few and far between it doesn't feel like the product of some possibly rushed development or anything along those lines. The game also maintains a steady frame rate more often than not, but you will notice a slight dip here and there. There's also a lot of contribution by the fanbase, and it's really nice to see the developers implement something like this in the form of posters, bathroom signs, and even fan-made music. this is how you do fan service. And speaking of the music, the game takes a very similar approach to pre-2013 Tomb Raider game audio cues, where more often than not, you'll hear ambience rather than actual music, and this helps build the immersion further. And when the music kicks in, it really kicks in, as it's mainly used for action set pieces such as the chases, for instance. The tracks themselves aren't all that memorable, but they still manage to fit the occasion they're used in despite that. The voice acting is also handled really well. Not only that, they also managed to get popular faces in, such as Lani Minella, who was the voice of Rouge Rabat in the early 2000s Sonic games, as well as Luke Triton in the US versions of the Professor Layton games.
Half these people don't know a wrench from a dang steamroller. Bunch of morons is what they are. Spend their day in the warehouse arguing over who's supposed to be doing what or playing them silly games.
And even Jacksepticeye at one point.
I don't be seeing what the big deal is. So what if I went and painted some of those Bendy dolls with a crooked smile? That's sure no reason for Mr. Drew to be flying off the handle at me.
Now that's pretty cool. As you've probably seen or heard by this point, the game goes for an episodic structure of 5 chapters, similar to the structure of a Telltale game where each part ends in a cliffhanger, like the one I previously stated in Chapter 1 where Henry falls over due to a summoning circle somehow, and in Chapter 2 there's even a living Boris. As much fun as I have with this game, the chapters can be really short and tend to finish before they really have a chance to shine. But since physical versions of the game immediately send you into the next chapter, I can look past that. And when I say short, I mean that Bendy and Ink Machine is a short game. Like, you can probably beat Portal at least twice levels of short on repeat playthroughs. On initial playthroughs though, you may be spending more time trying to figure out what to do or where certain items are, and this is further exemplified by the collectibles. The game has 2 types of collectibles scattered throughout. The first and most common are the bacon soup cans, and the other are audio logs left by former employees. They also manage to serve a purpose outside of just being little knickknacks to arbitrarily collect. Bacon soup can be used to recover health, and the audio logs are just exposition dumps of the events that took place before the studio shut down. They also give you a trophy or achievement if you collect them all, if you're into that stuff. Which I am. But I just haven't found the time to collect them all. But I digress. It's through these audio logs we learn more about the backstories of these employees, the events leading up to the creation of the Ink Machine, and Joey's manipulative and demanding intentions behind the scenes. I like that the game gives you some incentive to try and listen to these recordings, since you're not given much detail as to what Joey Drew Studios is, other than an animation studio where Henry used to work at. Bendy and Ink Machine handles this really well. Another thing I need to mention is how well the game keeps different locations inside the workshop distinct enough to establish that you are indeed moving throughout the studio with every chapter. 1 minute you'll be in the animation unit, and then you'll end up in the music department, maintenance areas, vendor and warehouse, and the depths respectively. Each location has their own unique aesthetics, so that no 2 areas feel alike. But Jeffrey, I hear you asking, why haven't you talked about the controls yet? The integral part of literally every game ever made. Well, anonymous viewer, I can proudly field that with, they're okay. Walking around feels a little stiff. When just pushing forward on the left stick and steering with the right, it's fine. But the problem I have comes from when you decide to move in any direction other than forward. When walking sideways to strafe around something, you're probably going to end up moving in a diagonal direction on top of where you're pushing the left stick. Meaning if you want to walk sideways to look around a certain point in the room, you're probably going to end up walking along some sort of jagged path like someone who overdid it on the alcoholic beverages last night. Henry's also able to run, which you will use a whole lot, as well as jumping, which you'll only use to hop over the very rare floor obstacle and attack with a very small variety of weapons, from an axe to a plunger, and even if you're skilled enough, a Tommy gun. Yes, a fucking Tommy gun. Hell yeah! Which brings me to my biggest gripe I have with this game. The combat is probably my least favourite part of the game. The devs really tried to put some depth into the weapons and enemy types, but I'm not a fan of how it turned out. I don't know if I was just shit at dodging the attacks, but the range for most of these enemies I'm not a big fan of. It doesn't help that Henry's backwards movement speed is slow, even if you have the run button held down, but it can be somewhat frustrating if a small group of enemies decide to gang up on you. It's not impossible exactly, and with the right weapon in hand, it can be lots of fun killing them in just 1 or 2 hits. But when a large group of them show up, then pray that you don't die. Not that there's any consequences of that, since every time you die you get sent into this inky intestine looking place where it feels like you're role-playing as the Ink Demon's lunchroom yesterday, and when you walk in the end, you reappear at the last checkpoint you passed and none of your progress is lost, which kinda defeats the purpose. Despite the pretty lackluster combat system, however, I really enjoy bosses and more important enemies to encounter in the game, but we'll get to them later. So we find the Boris clone at the end of Chapter 2, and then we get to what I find to be the best chapter in the game. but it is also kind of a worth to some degree. Now, the thing with Bendy and Meat Machine is that its horror is sprinkled across the game in small chunks. In the chunks with not much going on, the atmosphere is the only thing keeping you on edge, wondering when the next enemy will appear. This game's tension is generated simply by how it presents itself and its atmosphere, easily making it the game's strongest trait, and Chapter 3 just takes that tension, cranks it up to 11, and makes you cower and feel like the little bitch that you are. It also helps that Bendy doesn't actually jump scare you in this chapter unless you end up carelessly walking into his sight. Instead, he'll appear at random, and this pulsing ink effect will appear on the walls, ceiling, floor, and furniture, accompanied by a creepy echoing noise. This alerts the player that if they don't find a hiding spot, they will be fucked, without giving the player too much time to run away, or too little to not react quick enough. And since Ink Bendy is slightly faster than Henry, you need to either hide or accept the cold, slimy one-hit kill embrace of the ink. I really like how jump scares are presented in this game too. When most people hear the term jump scare, it's commonly associated with a cheap combination of flashing images and a loud noise to make you toss your system into a bin while you proclaim, "Never again shall I be fooled by you." And then you remember you tossed your system into a bin. Most jump scares have a pretty good, or at least decent, build-up leading up to them. Some of them can feel like they were thrown in for the sake of it, but others are carefully crafted and create a really good scare. My personal favourite being in, surprise surprise, Chapter 3, with the introduction of Alice Angel. You enter a room surrounded by Alice Angel merchandise with her theme playing in the background. Halfway through the third verse, the room with the backlights up, luring the player into walking up to the window, only for Alice to jump right in front of you and scream, they were executed really damn well. Chapter 3 has a really nice mixture of stealth and combat to create a really intense feeling, and especially if you're trying to get the Tommy gun, which is something you can use to make easy work of a projectionist. But it has one really big problem throughout: the fetch quests. The first half of the game has a strangely high number of fetch quests, but Chapter 3 takes that cake, eats it in front of everyone else at the party before shouting, "I'm better than you." There's 5 fetch quests in this one chapter. 5. This can leave the game feeling a little bit repetitive at times, since for the first half of the game that feels like it's all you're doing. Anyway, we finished Chapter 3 and Boris is stolen by Alice Angel, so Chapter 4 revolves around trying to rescue him before he's killed. This is also the chapter where we're introduced to the Lost Ones, who don't really do much here, and they kinda just like to stare at you until Chapter 5. After reaching the Bendyland warehouse, it's best not to question why all these attractions are underground by the way, we need to complete certain rooms to find switches to open up the haunted house ride. After learning that everyone thinks Joey is a massive piece of shit, you come across a room with a giant ride in the middle. Listening to a nearby audio log reveals that Bertram Piedmont, the park designer, thought that Joey was going to shove him to one side after the completion of the park project. And then...
I built this park. It was to be a masterpiece. My masterpiece. And now you think you can just throw me out? Trample me to the dust and forget me? No! This is my park, my glory. You may think I'm wrong, but I'm still here.
Amusement park ride boss fight. With Bertram's head as a centerpiece for all the family to enjoy. Oh, goody! And yes, this game does have boss fights, and I'll cover them when I get to them, but Bertram is the first one, and despite its simplicity, I really like it. The music once again is also a big part in making the fight feel much grander than it actually is, since all you're doing is just destroying the contraption with 4 arms. Not long afterwards, the projectionist makes his return, and since we don't have a shooty stick, we need to sneak around him so he's an actual threat this time. And when he spots you, that music kicks into overdrive. In case you couldn't figure it out yet, this soundtrack is great. And then our boy Bendy shows up and he gets into a fight before vanishing through the wall. Not long after that, we get to use the haunted house ride to reach Boris, but instead he reaches us first, because Henry will always be a slow coach. This leads into our second boss of the game where we need to avoid his attacks, which will cause him to drop ink blots which can be used to create a weapon in this little machine thing here. Hit him when he's exhausted 3 times and he's finished. This second phase can be a real bitch. His slam attack feels like it's almost completely unavoidable. Look at this. Am I doing it wrong? I'm holding the run button. After he's finished off, he dissolves, and this is actually a pretty emotional scene. Alice Angel then tries to attack us, and then she gets stabbed by another Alice Angel and Boris. The fifth and final chapter starts with Henry being locked up by the second Alice and Boris, known as Alison and Tom respectively. They're a lot more concerned about how dangerous Henry can be, but Alison trusts him enough to give him the scene tool, a piece of equipment that can be used to show hidden messages on the walls that seem like random pieces of text for the sake of it. Waking up after that, Alison is trying to convince Tom to let Henry out before Ink Bendy shows up, but she's unable to let him out, even though Tom's holding a fucking axe, and they leave him behind, just like the message foretold. We are now able to use the scene tool manually with the flick of a button, and we find out that it actually displays messages from the future, as well as some helpful hints, but for some reason you can't move while using it, which I find a little odd, but it isn't used too frequently, so it isn't that much of an issue. It's using this new item that presents a solution for Henry to escape, and then he follows the others to try and catch up with him. One river barge escape sequence later, and a wild Sammy appears. Wait, didn't you die? He goes down pretty easily, and then after that, there's a Searcher and Lost One ambush. This is perhaps my least favourite part of the game, not only because of my mixed feelings towards the combat, but also because of the small clusters of enemies that can easily get the upper hand in front of and behind you, so you will die quite a bit, or at least I did. Sure, you can regenerate health over time, but it's not worth much because of how far these twats can attack. It becomes really annoying really fast. Also, the trophy associated with this part can fuck right off. Following that, there's a really tedious segment where you're separated from Alison and Tom, again. You need to fill some gaps in a series of pipes. To get these pipes though, you need to sneak around administration to avoid the butcher gang and collect more ink blots. You need to do this 3 times. You're also defenseless, so this part should be pretty entertaining. Right? Nope. It's just not fun. Henry is faster than all 3 of them while running, so you can just easily charge in there, take the ink, run back, hide, then do the same again. Now, if all 3 members of the trio were faster, then I wouldn't mind it, but otherwise there's just no point in sneaking around to begin with. Outside of another trophy, that is. So we get all 3 pipes to open the film vault, but what we need to be stolen by the Ink Demon, so we need to head to his lair to find and use it. The item in question being film reel labelled at the end. We also see that the Ink Machine's final destination, oh yeah, haven't seen that in a while, is another, much larger version of itself, situated on top of the lair. After taking the reel though, Bendy's standing behind his throne and then transforms into the final boss, Beast Bendy. Wow Bendy, I knew you skipped leg day and all, but this is ridiculous. The fight itself is also really easy, with the first half just being a glorified game of crossing the road to find switches to leave the room, and the second half being where you need to fool him into destroying some ink tubes and make it back to the throne room to show him the reel. It's fun, but a little bit underwhelming. After the demon is dealt with, Henry reappears in Joey Drew's apartment, where Mr. Drew admits that he was an asshole and that he let power get the better of him, but also tells Henry to visit the studio again. Henry leaves the apartment to end up in a workshop again, and the start of Chapter 1 is recreated, making some kind of time loop before the credits roll. While I did have fun with Chapter 5, I do think it's the weakest chapter due to its setbacks and missed opportunities. So, now that the game is finished, we can use the scene tool in previous chapters as well as explore a bonus chapter called The Archives. The Archives is similar to the Insomniac Museum from the Ratchet & Clank series, where you can see how little details such as how character designs change throughout the development of the game. I really like this as a little reward for playing. If it unlocks properly, that is. There's also a good amount of replay value in the hidden secrets that you can easily miss on your initial playthrough. And that was Bendy and the Ink Machine. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with this game. The visuals, audio, and general atmosphere help immerse you into the game's world, and the story is rather interesting, especially considering this is an indie title. The gameplay tries to keep things fresh by having you move from one location of the studio to the next, despite the repetitive nature of some of the missions. And some of the problems I have with the game, such as the combat, may be fixed in the sequel, so I'm really curious to see how they'll expand on that. If you ever find it for a reasonable price, and can excuse the janky controls and mildly infrequent horror, then I'd say you'd still have a good time with this game, or at least I did. That's all for now, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, then please leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. See ya!